Dear students, today we are going to have another lecture on anthropological linguistics, and the topic I have chosen for today's lecture is cultural and linguistic constraints on mind. As you can see, this is the fifth topic of our course contents, and let's see what are possible questions that have been asked in your past papers. As you know, as a habit or as a, you can say, a teaching or learning style, we have always adopted a method in which we have applied all the topics, or we have analyzed all the topics in the perspective of the style of the university, that how University of Punjab deals the topic and how they when they make paper and what sort of questions you can be asked about one particular topic. And this is how you can actually learn how to attempt papers and how to deal with different sort of questions which may have the same answer. So if you can see in question number 2, the topic that we are going to study today, which is cultural and linguistic constraints on mind. So question number 2, part 3, the question is, what are cultural practices and how they vary with the change of language? We will deal this question along with that topic. So let's start today's topic. So by topic, what we are going to study in today's lecture, today we will learn that what are linguistic and cultural constraints on mind, and we will try to understand the relationship between language and cognition. Now, what is cognition? Cognition is the understanding or thought process which happens in some part of brain. Cognition means understanding, comprehension, brain functioning, how your brain functions, different sort of informations, and how you try to understand new things, you try to process the information, and how you can actually transfer your information into in the environment or into the medium, the next medium which is in front of you. So, language is a fundamental aspect of human communication, as you all know, and it has a very important role in shaping the way we perceive and interpret the world around us. We have already discussed this concept in Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that language actually, according to some people, language actually shapes the way we perceive, we understand things, and how we explain things, how we explain different happenings around us. So not only we express thoughts, emotions, and also experiences, and it is very deeply related with culture. Culture has a lot to do with language. Language is always influenced by the culture and society that it is spoken in, because it has to reflect values, beliefs, and practices of particular society. What we want to achieve through language, definitely we want to express ourselves, express our society, and where we will express ourselves into the society with people. Why actually we need language? To talk to people, because human beings are social animals, so they have to socialize with people. Only for that purpose they need language. So what they will talk about in a society, definitely about culture, as culture is the way of living, it is the way of doing anything in your society. So this essay or this whole information, we will discuss the complex relationship between language and culture and cognition, and we will see what are the linguistic and cultural constraints, limitations, and that influences which are on our minds, and what can shape our understanding of the world, how culture and language can actually shape our understanding about the world. So whenever you are going to discuss linguistic constraints on mind, you will always talk about linguistic relativity. This concept has been explained and understood again and again, and it is very, very important, and you have to be very familiar with that. That is Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. It is also known as linguistic relativity. What does it say? It says that language actually influences thought and perception, how we think, how we perceive, how we understand things. They say that language has a lot to do with that. So as you know, it has two versions, stronger version and weaker version. And what is stronger version? Stronger version says that language entirely determines thought process. Like the role of language is completely dominant in all thought processes, the way we think. Whereas in weak version, the weak version says that language does not completely controls the process, the thought process, but partially it can influence. So how you can define strong linguistic relativity? It suggests that the structure, what does the language has? The structure, grammar, vocabulary. And actually it can restrict and define our cognitive categories. These things like the structure, the grammar, the way we understand language and process language, that can influence our understanding. It's the same way we can use language, we can understand language, we can transmit language, we can also perform different mental functions, cognitive functions in the same way, because our mind, which also deals language, and it also deals the other categories of or actions of the human body, so these two get influenced by each other. So in this view, speakers of different languages have fundamentally different worldviews because they speak different language, so their way of seeing the world is quite different because they have linguistic differences. For example, some languages may lack specific color terms. They don't have specific colors because it can influence how speaker perceive and categorize color, because they don't have specific colors, because their language has they don't have those colors terms, so they cannot explain or perceive those colors, right? What is weak linguistic relativity? The weak version says that language can influence perception and thought to some extent, not completely, but to some extent. So this version proposes that language shapes certain aspect of cognition, like some aspects of understanding, like attention. Your language may influence your level of attention, your memory level, or the way you perceive things. But actually, the structure of language cannot control the structure of thought. Somehow it can be influenced, but not completely. Now let's see how language and thought are interrelated. So language has a profound impact on our thought processes, how we conceptualize ideas and understand the world. So the structure of linguistics or language structures or rules or grammars, the way people speak, it can actually categorize objects, how they function, their language in their brain. Their brain will function in the same way to understand objects, events, and relationships in the cognitive frameworks. Their understanding other things will be influenced by the linguistic features, the linguistic structures in their minds. Language and spatial cognition. Now what is spatial cognition? Spatial means space, everything that you can see. Okay, so how you see things, how you perceive them, that is physically the things that you can see. Your way of perceiving those things can be influenced by language. There are some studies which have shown that languages with different spatial terms, which have different terms for defining directions, they can influence how speakers perceive and navigate place. Their way of navigation, going to some place, will be influenced by the way they are using the terms for directions. For instance, languages that use absolute directions, in which they use the words like north, south, east, west to define different directions instead of relative ones. Like there are some languages in which people describe directions into right, go to left, and some people say go to north, go to south, or east and west. So why their way is different? Because they perceive directions in that way, because in their language it is the only way to describe directions. So it may lead to differences in spatial orientation and memory, because their language have those terms to explain directions, so it will influence their spatial orientation. There is one interesting study which I would like to mention. There, according to some people, or according to some study which I will share with you later on the reference, there are The people who have language starting on the right side, like the alphabet starting from the right side, they will have inclination towards right-handedness. For example, if we are speakers of Urdu, so Urdu is written from right to left. So whenever an Urdu speaker will enter into a room, so he will have a view first into right side, because his language is written from right to left. So their handedness is more influenced to right to left. So they will preferably see or start things from right side rather than left side. Similarly, the people who have language, who use language which is written from left to right, they are believed, or it is said that they would have left-handedness whenever they will enter into a room and when they will start some new job or something physical. So they will start from left side. It is just a theory. It has not been proven yet, but it is just a study which you can mention. I will share with you people. Then language and time perception. Language may vary in how they conceptualize and express time. Speakers of languages with complex tense systems may have different perception of time. Why some languages have present indefinite, we have present indefinite, present perfect continuous, present perfect, and there are some languages which only have simple sentences, no complex sentences, because their way of perceiving time is different, simpler and less complex. That is why they don't have, because their language does not have so much or so many rules about language. So the way they express time, or the way they see time or express their you can say durations, it is quite simpler because their language has simple tense systems. Okay, what are cultural constraints on minds? Cultural embeddedness of language, what is that? Let's see. Language is deeply embedded in culture. How? Because it can reflect the values. Through language, you will reflect your values, traditions, and social practices of community. Cultural norms and beliefs influence the development and use of language. And similarly, if a language is influenced by culture, it can also influence the culture as well. Both are interrelated and both are influenced by each other. You will speak in a particular way when you will enter into some culture. You have to follow their usage of language. So if you want to talk with somebody with different culture, you have to learn their culture, otherwise you may sound rude or inappropriate. So language is always influenced by culture. Similarly, culture is also influenced by language. Also, there are some cultural naming practices, like culture often have specific naming practices. You can define the same thing in different way. You may have some connotations with some names which may be positive or negative. Similarly, some cultures have some positive connotations within their language which you may not have in your language, because this difference is because of culture. So naming practices also are influenced by culture, and it can be influenced by historical, religious, or ancestral meanings, and it can shape the way individuals identify with their cultural heritage. Every language has some idioms and metaphors which may represent their culture. These linguistic expressions often convey complex cultural concepts which cannot be described otherwise. The idioms, the metaphors every culture has, they have a wisdom, and that wisdom cannot be taught otherwise, which you can teach just within one idiom. So it is so much beautiful and cultural phenomena that you can actually teach a bigger lesson through just shortest idioms and metaphors. So these linguistic expressions often convey complex cultural concepts that may be challenging to translate directly into other languages. It cannot be translated always because you may not share those cultural values. So idioms cannot be translated mostly. So language and cultural cognition. Through language, you can understand culture. Language serves as a vehicle for cultural transmission. It is a medium of transmission of culture. It can preserve cultural knowledge, myths, and narratives. The way language encodes cultural concepts and values shapes cultural cognition. The way you will talk about culture, the way you will interpret culture, it will shape the cultural cognition of people. Okay, sorry. So, there is a specific concept of self for every individual. So, cultural conception of self can also be different because every culture has distinct or different ways of conceptualizing the self. Okay, so individualistic cultures emphasize personal achievements. The cultures which propagate or which have a greater sense of individuality, they would focus on personal achievements and autonomy, the freedom of self, the freedom of individual. Whereas the cultures which stress on collectivist or collective benefit, they would put focus on harmony and interconnectedness, on the unity or on the collective benefit, right? So culture also gives you a concept of yourself. Either culture can integrate, or it can actually give you sense of individuality, or it can give you a sense of unitedness or collectiveness, the collective benefit. So culture always influences the way you live, the way you think, and even the way you speak. Cultural narratives and world views. What are these things? Narratives and stories embedded in language transmit culture, cultural worldviews, moral values, and social norms. So, culture can actually teach you your worldview. It can tell you, it can shape your view about the world. It can form your moral systems, and it can give you sense of social norms. So, these narratives influence how individuals perceive and interpret their roles within a society. So let's talk about this relationship which we are going to trace between language, culture, and cognition. So language and culture influence each other in dynamic interplay, shaping our minds and our understanding of the world. The relationship between language and culture is complex and reciprocal. Both influence each other, both have equal influence on each other. As you know, language actually reproduce culture, because without language you would not be able to transfer your culture. When you reproduce, you actually reproducing your language, your culture, your society. You are transferring your culture and norms from one generation to the other generation. And how you do? Through language. Okay, this is how your cultural norms, practices, and beliefs are transferred through generations to generations. So language contact and cultural borrowing. What is that? When different languages come into contact, they borrow one thing or the other from each other. They can be words, expressions, and different cultural practices which can come into existence as a result of contact of two cultures. It is very inevitable thing. When two cultures are living together, they will give and take different things with each other. So language also borrows these things. Language can also get influenced by the other culture. This is called language contact and cultural borrowing. To conclude this whole topic, the intricate relationship between language, culture, and cognition highlights the linguistic and cultural constraints that influence the human mind. Language shapes our perception, categorization, and the understanding of the world, while culture influences the development and use of language itself. So, this dynamic interplay between language and culture shapes our cognitive frameworks and plays a crucial role in shaping our identities and understanding of the world around us. So, studying the linguistic and cultural constraints on mind offers valuable insights into the rich diversity of human expression and cognition across different societies. That's it for today. I would like you to invite to add more things into this topic so that we can share the knowledge in a better way. That's all.